Hi, everyone. My name's Andy Carvell, and this session is about increasing mobile subscription revenue. It's a relatively in-depth, I guess, for 30 minutes. I'm going to try and cover a fair bit of ground. It's not going to go super deep, but if you're interested in understanding a bit more about mobile app subscription models and how to increase your revenue whilst trying out the subscription model in your app, I think you'll hopefully learn something. I'm going to break down some levers for for experimentation and increasing your mobile subscription revenue. So, quick introduction to me. My name's Andy Carvell. I'm a mobile growth practitioner, I guess, since quite a few years, and I've been in the mobile industry for quite a few years more than that. I started out as a developer. I made a game called Space Impact back in 1999 for Nokia. And I've been in the mobile industry ever since. My career journey took me to SoundCloud, where I spent 4.5 years working on mobile growth. I'm really helping them to transition from being a web-first product to a mobile-first product. I was most recently running the retention team at SoundCloud there. I co-host a podcast called Mobile Growth Nightmares with Jessica Beachigo from Blinkist. And I created a framework called the Mobile Growth Stack, amongst other things. I'm not going to talk too much about the stack today, but you can read all about it at mobilegrowthstack.com. And I'm currently running a mobile growth consultancy called Phiture, which I co-founded with my co-founder, Moritz Dan. We won some awards lately. I'm not going to brag about them too much. You can see them on the screen. We work with B2C apps, typically growth stage apps that are looking to get a bit more systematic about how they approach mobile growth. We give them the tools, the techniques, the processes, and the hands-on help to really accelerate their growth, whether that be through acquisition, engagement, retention, or monetization. So I said I'm not going to talk about the mobile growth stack too much today, but here it is. I think it's just useful to call out, which areas of the mobile growth stack I'm going to be talking about today. So if we look at the monetization layer, out in the middle of the stack, I'm really going to be kind of focusing on revenue model development, specifically subscriptions, a little bit about payment processing, I guess, definitely covering pricing a little bit. International will be briefly touched on. And I'll definitely talk about conversion optimization. I'm also going to just briefly mention some channels as well, particularly email, push notifications, and in-app messaging, which you can use to increase your subscription revenue. So let's talk about subscriptions a little bit. Everybody at the moment is trying to use the subscription model. I think since Apple and Google made it easy for apps to offer subscriptions, we see more and more apps trying it. Now, I think it's debatable how many subscriptions or how many subscription apps can really succeed in the market. But every time I've been skeptical on that, it seems that the subscription market is still growing, and that actually all kinds of apps can make a good living from subscription. And there are some great benefits to that, which we'll talk about in a minute. I do think that some apps are definitely more suitable for the subscription model. In my view, that's anything that has new, fresh content on a regular basis, something where you can offer to a long-term subscriber something new in the app or in the experience. So particularly things like content platforms, meditation apps. I'm going to use Headspace as an example in this talk quite a bit, actually. Could be fitness apps, and many other types, but I think the main thing is you should have something new to be able to show or to offer your subscribers as they keep coming back, rather than just a one-time useful app. But even some utility apps are trying subscription model, and good luck to them. Okay, so just think a little bit about why would people do a subscription model if you're thinking about maybe trying it out? Well, often you'll get a higher lifetime value from your customers. You get recurring revenue, which is the great thing. Instead of trying to do in-app purchases or a one-off payment for your app, if you can get people to sign up to a subscription, you can keep billing them, over and over again until they cancel. You've also got more predictable revenue because of this. It kind of becomes a little bit easier to calculate your LTV or your ARPU, although there's still some complexity there, which we'll come on to. And of course, I think a really key positive is that Apple and Google offer like all of the toolkit for you to offer subscriptions, including payment processing in like every country, and all the sort of nuts and bolts around like providing a subscription service to your customers. So they really make it quite easy, albeit with a 30% tax. Yeah, so some of the challenges, I mentioned the tax already. You definitely need to sort of try and keep your subscribers coming back if you want that repeatable revenue. Yeah, there's a question of like how many different subscriptions a user will hold. Like, I've got like a Netflix subscription. I have a music streaming subscription. I have a few, but I'm not going to have like 20 subscriptions. Maybe some people do. So it's about finding the right users who are actually going to really value your subscription as well. And maybe it's a bit, people do think twice before subscribing. They see a lot of these. There's also been some dodgy apps in the marketplace that have really kind of tricked people into subscriptions, and then they've not realized that it's a recurring payment. So people are a bit wary about subscriptions, and you need to sort of help them get over that as well and see the value you're providing. So I mentioned that the tax, right, which you sometimes call the Apple tax, or the Google also charge this fee. 30% in the first year of your revenue, drops to 15% in year 2. Particularly with Apple, who are very kind of sensitive around this, like they don't want you to be trying to drive people to alternative subscription methods from the app. So if you're going to try to avoid this tax, and some big companies do, because 30% is a big chunk of your revenue, right? Like you've got to think like, is it worth it? Because you're going to then have to do a lot of stuff on your own, payment processing, refunds, all of this stuff. You're going to either have to find another provider. You can do this on the web, and there are some, of course. But then you've also got to then figure out how to make that process kind of fit with the Apple guidelines and with the UI of your app in a way that, which doesn't get you kicked out the store. I would say for most apps, it's probably not worth it to go through all that hassle, especially since Apple and Google make it really easy for you to manage subscriptions like within your app. Maybe better to try some of the techniques that I'm going to talk about today and see how much you can increase your revenue before thinking about trying to avoid this tax. But like some of the big players definitely do it. So let's talk a bit about how to measure subscription revenues, right? It's not maybe quite as easy as you think. There's a great article on the Mobile Growth Stack blog by a guy called Jakob Chur, who has a lot of experience with price testing and working with subscription apps to improve their revenue. And he kind of points out a couple of key things. Like you want to know not just who's subscribed, but who's canceled and who's asked for a refund as well. So you need to know when a subscription actually finishes, as well as like users who are asking for refund, because it makes a very big difference to how valuable that user appears to you when you're trying to do your calculations. Now there are, you get a lot of notifications and ways to get this information out of both Apple and Google. So it's possible to do all this tracking on your own. There are also some good tools out there. I've heard great things about Revenue Cat. I haven't used it myself in depth, but it looks like a really good tool. They're not paying me to say this. It's just like I've heard a lot of people are using that to sort of manage some of the complexity around understanding like how much users are worth and how much revenue you're really earning from subscription. So if we think about now strategies to increase subs revenue, I'm simplifying this a little bit, but your revenue on a user basis is a function of their subscription price that they're paying and how long they keep paying it for, so their subscription lifetime. And therefore, if you think about all users, including the ones that are maybe free to start with, or the users who aren't immediately subscribers, they'll install the app. Maybe you have a free tier that they might play around with. Maybe you put them straight into a trial, basically, or you give them the option to opt in straight into a trial. Or maybe you don't have a trial and they just go straight to a paying subscription. So I'm just sort of simplifying that to conversion from install to subscription. Like some percentage of users will become subscribers. And you can work on that with CRO, conversion rate optimization. You've got your subscription price. You can play around with different price, different tiers, different kind of bundles of things that you offer at different price levels maybe, or just even if you just have one subscription, you can play around with the price there. And of course, you can try and increase the average subscription lifetime, and that's through like subscriber retention efforts. So in the next 20 minutes of this talk, I'm going to cover all three of these at some level of detail. So let's start with CRO. So basically, trying to get more people to start a subscription or a trial. I'm not going to make a big distinction between those two things or get too deep into trials today. I'm really just going to sort of focus on whether you can get someone to opt into that process, whether it's straight into a subscription or into a trial. So you're probably very familiar with these kind of paywalls, an upsell page. Often they're implemented natively. Sometimes they're also implemented with in-app messaging. I've also even seen them implemented through like ad platforms like Mopub. However they're implemented, it's basically a screen which you're as a developer, you're really trying to show the user what value they're going to get from taking a chance and starting a subscription. There's a really good article on this on Medium, which I've got the link to there in the on the right hand side by a guy called Michael Langmeier. I'm not sure, hopefully I'm pronouncing his name correctly. I really recommend reading this article. It goes into a lot of depth about subscriptions in general, and I stole the screenshot from him here. So Michael recommends a few things, but it's kind of mostly not rocket science. First thing, you want to be really talking about the benefits that your subscription is going to bring. The user needs to know what are they going to get for this money, and you shouldn't really focus too much. If you've got ads and you're removing ads, like ad free, for sure, it's a bit of a benefit, but they really want to know what extra stuff they're going to get from the subscription, and you should test different messaging around this to see if you can optimize your your kind of regular upsell page further. But you might want to also think about creating custom upsell pages for different use cases or different segments. And I'll talk about some segmentation approaches you can use in a moment. And you can also get a lot of extra value out of customizing and personalizing some of your other messaging that might drive them to even a generic paywall. So even if you don't iterate too much on your main paywall, you can iterate on the messaging, the CRM you use with push, in-app, and email to talk to users who have shown some intent to purchase. And that's what I'm going to come on to in a second. So I want to talk a little bit about this model, kind of different levels of escalation based on intent. And so I'm going to outline basically two and a half methods, two and a half indications of intent. So kind of going from the weakest intent, which I'm going to call indirect intent, all the way through to abandoned cart, so users initiating a purchase, or actually, I'm going to broaden that slightly and say they've interacted directly with the paywall in a meaningful way, which shows a very high level of intent. So I'm going to break those down a little further. I'm going to use Headspace as an example. Headspace, for those of you who don't know, it's a meditation app. They have a free tier. And by the way, these examples that I'm going to use, they're really only valid if you have some kind of a free tier. If you're pushing your users directly into a subscription, or there's no way to use the app without a subscription, then these segmentations and optimization methods I'm going to show in this section are not going to be so appropriate, because they're kind of based on knowing something about the user's behavior within the app. So with Headspace, they've got a basics pack. You can do these meditation courses, this meditation course, you can do all of the sessions for free, and you can do them as many times as you want. So you get some access to some free content. You get to try out the app and see what it's all about. Now, but this is pretty common, and I would generally recommend that you have a free tier that allows the user to explore and use some of the content at least, and get a feel for what value they would get if they upgrade. And then the trick becomes with your CRO, giving them all those right nudges and encouragement to upgrade based on their intent. So if you're seeing indirect intent, which I'm going to term briefly as users who have shown some serious engagement in the free tier. So in Headspace's case, they've completed a bunch of meditations, but only the free ones, right? And if it's only indirect intent, that means that they haven't tried to interact with any of the paid features or the paywall. They've just shown general engagement. And this is a really good sign, because they're clearly getting some value out of the app, and maybe you can convince them to pay to get more value from your paid subscription. Now think about direct intent, also from Headspace, just as an example. In this case, we would count direct intent as interactions with features which are clearly marked as being sort of behind behind a paywall or premium subscription features. So we see here on the left-hand screenshot, there's like you can meditate with other people, and it says subscribe to unlock. It's got a little padlock on it. So it's sort of indicating that it's a paid feature. Not every user is going to understand like exactly what that means, but most of them hopefully will. And in any case, they've shown some interest in a feature which is behind the paywall. So you can maybe address them and personalize your messaging to them in a slightly different way through some methods which I'm going to talk about in a moment. Similarly, if they've seen the paywall, they've hit subscribe now. That's a very direct intent, and that would be qualifying for what I call a abandoned cart, which I'll come on to in a moment. Now, it could well be that you have a user who's displayed both indirect and direct intent. So this is like a really good level of intent. They've played around with the free tier. They've shown some curiosity in the paid features or functionality or content. So you really want to kind of maybe encourage them to explore that paid tier even more, because they've shown some really good interaction with the free content. And maybe you can personalize based on the features or content that they've shown an interest in that paid tier. You can personalize your upsell messaging to explain maybe more about those things that they've shown an interest in already. Like, for example, in this case, it's the Everybody Headspace. You could send them an email explaining why it's so great and really sort of kind of try and tease them a little bit with what they already experimented with. And then I'm going to call it abandoned cart here. You might be familiar with abandoned cart from e-commerce model, where it would literally be they've started to try and pay for something but not quite finished. Here's an example from Headspace. I'm going to actually argue that you could still use abandoned cart type techniques if they've shown any real interaction with the paywall. We've seen good impact even with people who didn't hit the subscribe now button, but for example, toggled the pricing and between annual and monthly. Shows that they've at least been, quite seriously looking at it. Similarly, you see at the top here, it's kind of between two different pictures. It's because they've been swiping. It's a swipey that shows different benefits to the user. It's kind of a fairly interactive upsell screen. Any interactions like that, maybe they've looked at the terms and conditions on the subscription. All of these things would be a good indication that it's more or less abandoned cart. You got them very close to a subscription, and maybe you want to take a slightly different approach when talking to them, possibly even offer them a discount, although you've got to be careful with that a little bit. But I would argue it's well worth segmenting these users differently and interacting with them a little bit differently depending on the level of intent that they've shown. If they've shown high intent, really try and show them stuff tied to what they've shown interest in. If you've got only indirect intent and you don't really have much of a feel for what their tastes are, because maybe you only have some fairly limited content in the free tier, so it's maybe not enough to understand deeply what they're interested in. You could of course ask them what they're interested in with a survey. I would recommend that. But failing that, you could just look at what's the most popular stuff that people are accessing in the paid tier, and just go with aggregated, trending content or things that are most popular, and use that as maybe an upsell to see if that is enough to tickle the fancy of somebody who's shown some indirect intent. And if you do have any other signals from the free tier usage, say your content platform and they've been listening to a lot of music on there, from a certain genre, then absolutely use that genre in your upsell messaging to try and increase that intent and try and get them over the line with a subscription. And yeah, I think this kind of slide kind of brings all that together. I notice I've only got 12 minutes left, so I'm not going to dwell too much on this, and because I want to actually show you a little bit more about some other methods, other strategies that I mentioned at the start. I will just give a little plug for Blender, our in-app studio. We developed a studio here which allows developers to very quickly customize new in-app messages and dialogues. These are great for upsell, also great for lots of other use cases. If you're interested in checking out Blender and seeing how you could use it for upsell or anything else, feel free to get in touch. Okay, that's enough of the sales pitch. Let's talk about price testing briefly. So again, we've got a great article on price testing on our blog. Jacob goes into a lot more detail than I'm going to do in the next few minutes. So I'll sort of just break down a couple of his key points. One, he recommends that you actually survey users, and actually ask users or people in your target market what they'd be willing to pay for a service like this, and try and get an understanding of what that kind of price sensitivity is, and try and understand how much you might be able to get away with charging, and do this on a market by market basis. I mean, like geography wise, because it will vary a lot. So Jacob's advice, if you've got some users who are willing to pay a lot, like give them a platinum option, give them a, like all bells and whistles, super expensive. I'm not sure if Headspace still do it, but they had a lifetime subscription, which was like $400. If some people are going to pay for a lifetime subscription, let them do it. Give them the option, and it also makes the other subscriptions look cheaper, by the way. Another like key point here is a lot of subscriptions, happen in the first 24 hours. So if people are like still not subscribed after a week or two, but they're still around or contactable, you might want to consider discounting. Now, discounting gets a bit tricky in terms for many reasons. You don't want to get people addicted to discounts or expecting them and kind of holding on for that discount. Otherwise, you're kind of devaluing like your whole proposition. But discounts and coupons, can be a really valuable way to kind of get some more people across the line later in the process. Bear in mind that a lot of your subscriptions, if they're going to happen, will happen very early on in the life cycle. And so you want to be, adjusting your lifecycle marketing to understand that and be presenting lots of opportunities to subscribe early on without like flooding the user. So again, going back to the intents, the more you can personalize that, the less jarring that's going to be, and the less it's going to be just like buy. I already mentioned geos. I don't think I need to dwell on that too much. Pricing on subscriptions, you will want to vary that a lot per market. Somebody who might be willing to subscribe to your app, who's based in Vietnam, is probably going to be willing to pay a lot less than somebody who's based in the US, for example. And so Apple and Google both allow you to adjust your pricing on a geo basis. And it's about finding that sweet spot in each region, which again, there's a lot of price testing involved if you really want to like optimize that to the nth degree. And finally, increasing subscriber retention. Like you do really want to try and keep users active throughout their subscription. Particularly if you want people to just keep coming back, month after month. I do recommend that you don't employ what I call the ostrich strategy, sticking your head in the sand. If you haven't seen a user for months, let's say they're on a yearly subscription, it could be that they go 6 months without ever being in the app or using any of your content. It's possible that they'll just renew, like in fact that they will probably auto renew if they don't cancel. But you'll probably find a lot of people then get back in touch with Apple and say, hey, I didn't realize it was going to renew. I don't want it anymore. Actually, Netflix just recently did something which I'm actually very impressed with, that they auto cancel subscriptions that are like inactive and dormant for a long time, because they realize that the ostrich strategy doesn't win them any favors. You might get a bit of money out of some folks who just don't notice that it's getting out, withdrawn from them. But if they're not getting any value from the app, you don't really have any business charging them. And I don't recommend it as a strategy to just try to get people on a subscription they forget about. But some apps do quite well out of it, I have to say. With subscriber retention, it's really about trying to keep them engaged throughout the life cycle. If you've got fresh content coming, make sure they know about it. Lifecycle marketing, activity notifications are great for this. A couple of examples here, just sort of fairly generic lifecycle marketing examples. Things like run streaks, like trying to get them to come back multiple times in a week or in a month, whatever the kind of appropriate cadences for your kind of app, really kind of helps to keep people engaged over the long term. Just letting them know that there's new stuff happening in the app, new content available to them, just basically keep in touch with them throughout, and hopefully, and also just monitor their engagement with this stuff and see if they're actually interested in the new stuff that's coming out. And if not, you want to ask yourself why. Are you releasing the right content? Or maybe you're releasing so much content that they need more help finding the stuff that's going to be super relevant to them. But subscriber retention efforts can really extend your LTV significantly. So on that note, if you start to see users who are getting disengaged, getting less engaged, sometimes, that's just going to happen overnight. They'll just go from being highly engaged to zero engaged, and you never see them in the app again. maybe they even uninstall or cancel their subscription. But in many cases, you'll see a sort of a slow drop off. So if you're measuring this stuff in your analytics and you're seeing how people are interacting with the app, then you should start to see this drop off. And now whether or not you try and build like a fancy machine learning churn predictor, or whether you just kind of keep an eye and you kind of do regular segmentation to look at users who were more active and whose activity is declining, it can be a very good way to understand and to target users who you might want to get in touch with, and try some sort of maybe slightly more drastic tactics to bring them back. But certainly, yeah, you don't want to wait until they've gone completely dormant, because it can be really hard to reactivate users who've completely lost interest. Okay, so I have about 4 minutes for questions. So I'm going to look in the Q&A section here. Okay, so I've got a question here from Stanislav. Which is better for total sales, monthly or yearly subscriptions? So in Jakob's article, which I'm going to just shamelessly quote, he says shorter subscriptions are generally more profitable. Yeah, I've seen that as well with some of the clients that we've worked with. So monthly goes generally better. Yearlies are, they're nice because you can charge a chunk for them, but usually yearly subscriptions are often discounted heavily. If you're able to charge on a yearly basis and charge the same amount as you would for 12 months, then great, maybe your yearly is going to work really well for you. But often the yearly is significantly cheaper than the monthly because it gives you this guaranteed revenue up front. So from a cash flow perspective, yearlies are great, but monthlies tend to bring in more revenue overall. Hopefully that answers your question. Do we have any other questions? I have literally like 2-3 minutes left. That's the only one that I've seen in the Q&A. Oh yeah, we have one more. Sylvan. Have we seen any success in consolidating subscription types, e.g. 1 month, 3 months, 6 months, 12 months? I'm not sure I follow the question. Could you quickly rephrase it, Sylvan, so I can understand, make sure I'm answering the right question? Hopefully he's typing there.
Hey Andy, just jumping in here. So I think his question is probably along the lines of like what monthly subscription types work, and like what have you seen done well, whether it's just 1 month or like 6 months, and trying to give a discount there, I think.
Okay, yeah, he's just answered as well. He says like, sure, go from 5 durations to 2 durations. So offering like fewer different options for subscription types, I guess. I don't think I have a case that I can kind of recall where I've seen that firsthand, that we've like run that test with a customer. So unfortunately, yeah, I can't really answer that very authoritatively. So I'd rather say no, I haven't seen success in it, but also I haven't seen failure. I just haven't seen data to show how well that's been working.
Let's see, Stanislav is asking for the page that you had skipped.
Okay, which one was that? I don't think I skipped anything, but maybe I went quite quickly through something. It was probably, I think it was actually this one. Hopefully that's helpful. Any more questions? I think we have just about 1 minute left, so it's maybe about, maybe not quite enough time, but I'll happily jump on it. Or you can contact me. I'm going to switch back to my contact details.
Hey Andy, I've actually gotten a personal question. So it's actually like, how have you seen basically subscriptions and ad performance perform best together, and like what kind of combo and what platform would work best for that?
Subscriptions and performance marketing specifically, yeah? So,
right.
Through ads. And sorry, what platforms work best?
Mm-hmm.
It's a really broad question. I don't think I can generalize on that, because like we've seen a whole bunch of sort of different apps, different publishers, different subscription types. I think it's really too broad to say, if you do it like this, it's going to work for your app. Unfortunately, sure. It's a bit of a cop-out answer, but like this is stuff you have to test.
Right. Okay. Yeah, great. Well, hey, Andy, thank you so much for joining on. Always lovely had to have Phiture at our events. And for everyone else, we look forward to seeing you at our final and last session, Ask the Experts, a panel of 5, and I'll catch you all there. Thanks again, Andy.
Thanks, Evan. Thanks, everyone.